All right. The prompts on StreamYard. Let me take this off just for a second. The prompts on StreamYard say that I am live. It's always good to have some kind of validation coming from a virtual source that I am indeed live. What's happening, everybody? It's me, Robert Phoenix, and you are here today as part of the Friday Farcast. And this is where we get together with other people, and I do less of the talking, which I always look forward to. Not that I don't mind talking, but I'd like to hear what other people have to say as well. Today is one of those days. We have a really special guest that's going to be a part of our show. Her name is Raine, and some of you who follow Freeman TV, you may be familiar with her interview that she did recently, and uncovering her past inside of the Mormon Church, the Church of Latter-day Saints, and what went on in her past, which by all accounts sounds quite harrowing and not unfamiliar to people who have gone down the very dark rabbit hole of satanic ritual abuse in its various forms and manifestations throughout a number of different groups. And we're going to get into that today and a bit more with today's guest. So if you have any kind of trauma in your background, PTSD, you're going to want to pay attention today because from what I heard on Freeman's show, Asia has done an absolutely remarkable job peeling back the layers and understanding, to the best of her ability, what took place and how to manage it. And we're going to talk about that, but we're going to talk about a few other things that probably weren't covered. I didn't get to the second hour of the Freeman interview, the members only part. So I only heard the first hour, which was very powerful. So what I might bring up may have been covered on the second hour. And if it has, I don't really want to apologize, but we'll I'm assuming that maybe it wasn't covered, and we'll get into some of that stuff. And I'll tell you what else. I'll tell you how brave Asia is. She gave me her birth coordinates before the show because I guess she figured out that I dabble in the occult, that I'm an astrologer. And so I put her chart together and I asked her if she wanted to explore this live. And she said yes. So we're actually going to kind of bring these worlds together, right? The subject matter of the day, her life, her experience, and a little astrology. So I'm really excited. And anybody who's game to do that is A-OK in my book. Like, you get pre-qualified. So not that she wasn't already based on the interview, but it just took it to another level. So what I want to do before I bring her on is I do want to give a shout out to my sponsor, the only sponsor I have on this show. Besides me, I kind of sponsor myself on the astrological side, but I don't necessarily bring it up during the Friday Farcast. And there's a reason why, because we don't really do astrology. So truehempscience.com is the sponsor of the show. And I've been singing the praises of Chris's products every single day since we decided to jump on board and do this in a more formal fashion. So let me just give you kind of a bird's eye view of his website so that you guys can just slip on in there, get a little virtual hit of some natural resonance. And it's a great landing page because once you go to the landing page, you have to go through all the different products. And he's got great stuff, internal, external. He's got salves. He's got hemp products that are. Here, let's load more. He's got hemp products that are alcohol based, non-alcohol based, spagyrics, hemp products for sleep, hemp products for altering your mood slightly, and even improving. Let's read more. Look at that. This is the commitment to quality organic CBD oil. This is all true stuff, folks. Products driven by a passion for self-care. Again, all true stuff. And one of the reasons why it's true, it's because Chris has gone through health crises in his life, right? Look at anything, health crises in his life, and so he's essentially uh, been his own guinea pig, right? So you know that's what you want out of a business: accountability. Anyway, if you go here and you want to get $100 worth of CBD, then all you got to do is type in 15MINS, 15MINS, and you get free product with $100 and more on your purchase side of things. $150 or more, get you free shipping. So everybody wins. You get to support a small business, a guy who has really busted his ass to stay in the game and produce high quality products. You get something, I get something, we all get something. This is, I think, how it's really supposed to work. So there you go, truehempscience.com. Let's bring Asia onto the show and let's get into this. This is going to be a really interesting 2 hours, and I'm really looking forward to it. Hi, Asia. How are you?
Hi. I'm really well. Thanks, Robert, for bringing me on today. I'm looking forward to this, actually. And I'm kind of delighted about the whole, chart and bringing this together. It's going to be really interesting to me. So thank you.
I tell you what, I didn't look at I didn't look at your chart until 5 minutes ago when I pulled it up. So, this is in the business, they call this a cold read, right? So, but as soon as I pulled your chart up, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Yeah. Not only your natal chart, but, the transits and what you're going through, which we'll get into. But we'll do that later in the show.
Sure.
In the business, they call that a tease.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want the astrological sexy, you're going to have to stick around. So, all right, let's get into you. And what I like to do is I like to find out about people at the beginning of the show, and of course, the meat of what you're going to talk about has been your experience, your recovery, and we'll get there. But I want to just ask you a question about your early years and what your childhood was like. What growing up, and it sounds to me like you had a fairly good sized family from what I could gather from your podcast with Freeman, and what was that like for you and your formative years and moving into like your teen and adolescent period?
Wow, that's a really great question to like kind of begin all of this with, because the formative years, like just to give some framework to this, I was born into satanic ritual abuse. So the family was involved, and so were the grandparents, and like it was communal in that way. And so there were things about my growing up that as you're growing up, you don't see as odd or different, but also because of the process and how well refined the way the instructions, there's like actually an instruction manual on how to program children. And this is definitely, passed around and people know about this, and it's also practiced. And it's a passed down thing. I didn't necessarily remember everything. So my memories were repressed. And so that was something that was consciously done. There was programming, and when I say programming, I'm talking about specific phrases and situations that I found myself in that I didn't, I had no other reference point for, but what it was doing was triggering and really anchoring in programming and the unconscious and deeper parts of me. So I was the oldest of two oldest children, which meant I was the oldest granddaughter on one side and I was the oldest grandchild on the other side. And because of that, I feel like that's actually, now looking back on it, it was really fascinating because I got to see my grandparents from a really like more mature point of view, because I was growing up along with, on the one side where I was the oldest grandchild, this was on my mother's side, and my mom was the oldest of 11 children. And it was on a farm in Utah. And so my youngest uncle was only 5 years older than I was. And so when we would go over to help on the farm, I was just kind of like one of the other siblings, but I was still the granddaughter. And because of, propriety or whatever, I didn't really have to do like the work because I wasn't the child. I was the grandchild and I was a girl and all of the other interesting things that kind of put me in this really interesting dynamic where I got to participate, but I also got to observe. And so I saw my grandparents in a really interesting light. I watched my uncles in a very interesting way, and my aunts. And then on my father's side, and that's where the majority, all the abuse really happened was through that line.
Right.
So that one, I was the oldest granddaughter, which meant I was the first girl and I was the oldest, which means something in the ritual community. It meant something, right? There was going to be an earmark for who I was, what the bloodline was, how this was all going to get played out. And on that side of the family, I really got to witness and be in training in a way with younger grandparents as well. Even though they're grandparents, they're still on the younger side of things. So there were things that I actually got to see while grandparents were fairly spry and still active in life and in this ritual side. And it was fascinating to me because I was able to experience things that should have been kind of beautiful with grandparents, but were actually very interesting training mechanisms too. So that was fascinating. And I was
can I interrupt you for a second here? This is so when you say that they were interesting training mechanisms, do you think that your grandparents were conscious and aware of what they were doing, or were the training mechanisms just so embedded in the culture and the church and their behavior that they just kind of robotically carried them out?
There's a little bit of both. So since my experience really is through my father's side, I'm going to speak to that. There may be some incidentals on the farm side that I can bring in that kind of do a little bit of crossover, but my grandparents were consciously involved. My father was consciously involved. My mother was involved. I don't know how much of the consciousness was there because she was, as I got older, I noticed some differences about my mom. And this is before I was even recovering memories or even had the language to see that my mom basically had what I was tracking was 3 different personalities. And she would switch into these different personalities. And I was able to see it really based on the way she was dressing. It was really fascinating to me because I thought, God, that it was just weird. It was just different, but it was still my mom. So I'm just like, well, I guess that's the mood she's in. And that comment, I just want to stop here for a minute and say there's so many things people are wondering, like, how is it so prolific? Why aren't we picking it up? And it's because of comments that I just made like that. Well, that's just how they are. Well, that's just their personality. Well, they're a little quirky. Instead of actually looking at and having the information to tap into and go, I wonder if that individual has been triggered. I wonder if that's a part. I wonder. And I can say that in my case because I actually have the background to know that, yeah, there was a lot of conditioning and a lot of parts, a lot of fracturing and very conscious conditioning that was going on. And so just even simple things like, so my grandmother and her sisters, they were, my grandmother was from a German lineage and my grandfather was English. And in fact, he was English enough that I knew my great grandfather and he had come over on the boat from England. I was old enough because of who I was to be able to even have conversation with him before he died. And on the grandmother's side of things, I knew my great grandmother too. And so there was I was even able to tap into that next generation of understanding how generations go, as far as there is a great grandma and this is what she looks like. There is a great aunt and this is what she's and those kinds of things. So the generational thing was a really, it was good for me because I could see that this went on, that I could see that there's a longevity there. So with having German grandmother, they would make marzipan for Christmas, and they made the most beautiful little fruits. It was like a traditional German thing, and they take the marzipan and they turn them into these little oranges and bananas, and then they would take paint, like food coloring paint, and they would paint them so they looked real.
Mhm.
And so, as beautiful as that tradition was, it was also used to put drugs in the candy, so that was going to be part of the process of, here's our Christmas celebration, or here's our Christmas party, or here's something, try this, or whatever it is. And it was the precursor to being drugged, to be taken into a ceremony or delivered to somebody for sexual favors, or whatever it was that was being done right then. I
Wow,
did,
that's
yeah,
heavy. That's a really
yeah.
heavy discovery. Actually,
Right?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's, in fact, I think the hardest, since you brought that in, the hardest discovery for me was actually seeing the more and more memories that I was recovering, and the more present the role my dad played was really kind of, there was a lot of cognitive dissonance for me around that for a while,
Mhm.
because I couldn't understand how, and this, you'll hear people say this, is like, well, how could a parent do that to their child, and how could this, and how could that? And I was having specific body memories, emotional memories. I was uncovering and remembering ceremonies where my dad was not present. He had not been invited to that one, but I had been. Like, they wanted me there and other children, right? And
Mhm.
then he showed up as the rescuer afterwards. And that's part of the programming, that's part of the conditioning. So you're in this terroristic experience where somebody or something is dying or dead, and you watch them murder, and you watch the mutilation, and there's blood everywhere. And you're also being told words about it. Like, if you're actually physically involved with it in a way, because they do that all the time, then you're told, this is your fault. Look what you did, like, and there's evidence here, your hands were around the dagger, although there were other, bigger hands around your hands. They're showing you your hands are around the dagger, and this baby is dead because of you, right? And there's no disputing that. And so there's so much that gets layered, and then any kind of other situation that may crop up that they might not have planned, they commandeer the situation. If a child starts screaming, and they're kind of out of sync of what this is happening, and maybe the drug was wearing off or something like that, or they were just breaking down or something, then they could take that moment and say, see what you did, even though there's nothing going on. It's just another way to jar the child or the children around, or whoever's in that room. So the skill of being able to be in a ceremony and be in a situation, and own that, really just control the atmosphere, is it's also a practice talent that they take advantage of everything that they possibly can to keep loading the programming. This is your fault. You can't trust yourself. You can't trust God. You can't trust Jesus. Like, whatever it is that they've got kind of as the, I don't know, terror of the day, whatever the ceremony was supposed to be about for the conditioning, then they're going to really heap it on there. And then, so as this child that was experiencing that, and then emerging from it, and suddenly there's a familiar face in it, and in this case, it would have been my dad, right?
Right.
And it was just like relief, like the
Mhm.
whole system. It's so fascinating, because we're not humans are not a mystery to this group, to these groups at all. Like, we're biological beings that have very predictable physical reactions, such as orgasms, and they work for those things, because that's also going to be part of the shaming situation.
Mhm.
You're going to be like, when you get into these terror situations, you're going to have hormones coursing through your body. You're going to be switching into a different part of your brain. They want that. They know that. That's how they split you off. And then they're going to really exploit that and take advantage of that. So then my dad shows up, and all of a sudden I'm being rescued. He's the good guy. He's the only person in the world that I trust. And I told people that, like, when I was in like 5th grade, there was the assignment, who's your hero? And it was like, my dad. My dad's my hero. If he ever died, I would die too. And as I'm like older, I'm looking back on that going, that was probably a very programmed comment. Even
Mhm.
that statement of adoration was so beyond the mark in my circumstance of how much I had to balance out the terror with an over adoration of my perpetrator, of the man that was actually delivering me to these places and selling me to other people. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm going home with this guy. He's holding me. I'm just like relieved and crying. And not one part of my brain went, wait, how did you know to pick me up here? I was just ready to be out. Plus, I'm still under the influence of drugs because there's always a drugging that happens. You know, you're going to be under some kind of a different altered state. Right. Plus you're dissociated, plus, right? And we're getting in the car and I can finally like defrag. Usually you're always given some candy afterwards because the candy does something physiologically to actually shift the brain. Or you're given something to make you go to sleep. And when you're waking up, then it's kind of like this bad dream that you don't really remember because now you're getting programmed a different memory. Like there would be times like, wow, did you enjoy that birthday party? Man, you just really played so much. And gosh, you know, you just kind of fell asleep on the way home. And it would be like, birthday party? What was I at a birthday party? You know, right. So they start filling in all the details.
The birth of a demon birthday party. That's the birth of
a demon. Exactly. Well, yeah, you don't
know. Okay, can I put you on pause for a second?
Sure.
There's some things that I've kind of got in the back of my head that I need to ask you about and bring up before we go too far along. The DNA thing is interesting, and the first child relationship with DNA is interesting. And one of the reasons why I think it's interesting is because there are studies. Let me just do this. I can hear myself. Let me see. There are studies. How am I hearing myself? Give me 1 second. Just want to make sure I'm not. I've got this weird echo. All right, I'll fight through it. There are these studies that they have accrued that the firstborn gets the best DNA, right? And then as you go down the line, the DNA begins to kind of degrade a little bit. And in my mother's family, I can attest this to be true because her youngest sibling was sort of borderline developmentally disabled, was slow. Right. And then with my mother, she winds up kind of being the ultimate achiever of the family in a lot of ways. So that's part of it. The other thing that came to my mind was when you get into Kathy O'Brien and the Transformation of America, at the beginning of the book, it's pretty clear that her father is making a financial deal. Right. It's all based on power, money, position, influence. Like that's the economic trade-off for delivering his daughter to her future abusers. What was the payoff for your father inside the church to have this happen to you?
The hope was to go up in ranks, and up in ranks means really up in ranks in the church is basically set up, in my opinion, and I think this would be supported also with this statement. There's a kind of an unsaid adoration of the general authorities in the presidency of the church, the prophets, seers, and revelators, right? And there was a time when they've moved, it's really interesting, they've moved away from Jesus Christ as far as like media. I mean, you can always buy media. There's independent artists that are creating, you know, pictures of Jesus and stuff, but you can also go to their own distribution center where you're going to buy, you know, the garments, the Mormon underwear. You're going to buy like the books of Mormon, the King James version of their Bible, and you're also going to get all of their educational material, and you can purchase photos of the top 15 of these 15 leaders and have them around in your house, and you can have them. It's just it's become a really, really effective marketing tool, and I'm referring back to when I was active in the church, which would have been, well, let's see, I had my name removed back in 2015. And I stopped really formally going as I was going through this therapy, which was between 2003 and 2012. So I'd say about in 2010, I was seeing a really clear picture of everything. And I was attending church still, just, it was now more of to keep the face of what was going on, because I was so deep into everything and my suspicion level was off the chart. Like everybody was suspect in my book, because so many ways they track and infiltrate in so many ways. So I could see what was going on, but circling back to what I was saying, they've moved themselves into this space where I even heard people say, "Who's your favorite general authority? Who's your, like, how do you feel about the prophet?" It's this really kind of celebrity thing. And then if you can find yourself or a member of your family in the calling royalty, which would be in callings, it would be like in the 70, or like, especially if you were going to be called as a mission presidency or temple president or anything, those positions hold really special privileges that kind of in general public, they don't really know, but people do really look up to them and just like, "Ooh, wow, your dad's a mission president, a state president. Wow." And so the way that comes down is, the framework is God has talked to the prophet, who has talked to the next in line, and down, 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 until they say my dad or whoever, "God wants you in this calling." So it's like this direct, the membership looks at the callings as something specifically from God. And the better the calling, the more righteous you are. It's just a really equal, simple equation. So I know that there was a desire for him to move up in ranks. I remember my mom saying over and over, wouldn't it be great if your dad was like, "I really want him to be a mission president. I want to go somewhere foreign or whatever and have him be this mission president." And so I know that was part of it. That would be superficial. I know because my grandparents were involved, there was also a desire for him to move up in the ranks, or for somebody to bring that family up a little higher in status. And what ended up happening with me is I ended up getting sold into, or picked by, sold into, both of it, the church office building, going to the church office building. So being sold to Thomas S. Monson, and then being accessed by the men that were in those higher callings, and those, the prophets and the general authorities, and even some other people, not members of the church, that were high up in the Catholic religion as well. And that put me in a training program that would put me in a pool of women eventually to be chosen from for leadership positions. So then if I would be in a very high leadership position, which would be like, maybe a general Relief Society president, or on a general board, or whatever the calling would be, that also raises the status of the family. So there's that superficial part behind the scenes. So he was being paid. I remember seeing payment happen a few times. It's really kind of bewildering. There was one time I remember this, and it was just like, it was like the biggest gut punch I could even pull up in a memory, that it was like, I remember it was like I called it a bread truck, but like a package truck, those old bread delivery trucks.
Yep.
Pulled up in front of the house, and he called me outside, and I think I was anywhere between 6th grade and 7th grade. But these guys came out of the truck and then just grabbed me and just put me in the back of the truck. I think that they put like a sack over me or whatever, big bag or whatever. I was hooded, put me in the truck. And before that happened, I saw a money exchange, and it was at least $2,000. And that was back in the 70s, that was the 70s, I think, late 70s, which would have been a substantial sum. Right. And so there was that also trade, and that had nothing to do with, was that part of it? No, that had nothing to do with like the higher leadership. That was other transactions that were going on the site. And so the community is really big, and there's a lot of trading and selling and trafficking that happens in that way too. So there was benefit. He got assignments. Like there was one massive assignment he got. It caused us to move to Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a that's an incredible story in and of itself. That the assignment, if it went well, which it did, was going to prove to be another positive for him. But I'm not really sure what deals were made after that. I just know that we moved from there to Wyoming. And I'm not too sure what the payoff was in that one. That one I didn't get memories around necessarily, but I do know that was part of the process for him.
Mm-hmm. Right. So this is my understanding, and you can clearly correct me if I'm off the path here. But my understanding that the goal inside of the Mormon church ultimately is to become a god of your own planet.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
You're correct. Yes.
Yeah. So I would assume that by your father doing what he did to you, in a weird way, he might have equated that with being closer to godhood for whatever world that he was going to create at some point in time. Would that be a fair connection?
I don't know, because what you're repeating about the doctrine that was taught that I learned, and they've kind of tweaked it now, and they're like, well, no, we don't really say that, but they do.
Right.
That is part of it, and that's part of the encouragement, and maybe I would say the seduction and enticement to a human to go, I want to progress. I want to be to continue. I don't want to just die and be done. Okay. So you get to go on. You actually get to level up, be a god. And you don't have to lose your family, because these are people that you love, right? So this is where all the relationships are. And Mormons are great at fostering relationships and being really loyal, but they're also really terrible with boundaries. It's very porous, and that way everybody's in everybody's business and that kind of thing. But the training does encourage you to hit the highest kingdom. And so there's 3 kingdoms. You can either hit the low, the middle, or the high. And in the highest kingdom, there's even 3 more kingdoms that you can achieve based on your performance on earth and that kind of thing. And if you do qualify, then you do get to create your own world and populate them, which does kind of support the polygamy. It supports the polygamy idea, where you would need multiple wives so that you can have multiple spirit children to, inhabit this planet. So that would be part of it. That's what you're talking about. But in my experience, when we were in ceremony, they did not worship God. They worshiped Lucifer. So
right.
Lord Lucifer was actually the deity that all of this is happening for and to. They will call in demons through the spilling of a child's blood. They will call in demons through mass execution. They will call in and appease Satan, Lucifer, with all of this, the blood cult ritual. And these things showed up. I mean, they came. And that part of this whole 3D plane is something that we've been really well trained as a global society to kind of question, kind of put aside, so that this stuff could actually go on really uninhibited and unencumbered. So when you're asking me that question, I know that he and anybody else that really is enticed to choose into this has been abused themselves, has been split off and mind controlled themselves. And at some point, and I do not have an answer to this, but at some point a choice is made to either join it. Somehow there's something that appeals to them, and it's more than blackmail. It is something that they actually jump into and say, yes, I find something really powerful here, and I'm going to continue this, and I'm going to serve up my children and actively be part of this in the Kiwanis Club and anywhere else that I move. So that I can move myself forward. So perhaps, that's all I can say. Perhaps he gets a promise. Perhaps there's something that was consciously going through his mind to help him feel closer to God. But I think there's so much that is offered as far as compensation monetarily and power that is offered, participation in higher levels of I want to call it masonry, because that you go up in these levels of
Sure. I mean, I think we can make a direct correlation between Mormonism and masonry just based on Joseph Smith's background and ultimately what happened to him. at the end of his life.
Mhm.
So, I mean, there's a lot of really interesting kind of interstitial connections between Mormonism, Masonry, and Scientology.
Mhm.
You could probably bundle up all three, and you could come to the same conclusion around all
Yeah.
three. Do you know Bill Schnoebelen? Do you know who he is?
I actually don't. That's not a name I've heard of before.
Bill Schnoebelen is a very interesting character. I was pondering as to whether or not I wanted to play his video today. Bill Schnoebelen was a warlock,
Okay.
and he would go through all these different kind of occult teachings and systems.
Mhm.
And there was a guy who he was kind of his last teacher. He was a druid, and he said, "Listen, if you really want to get the final teachings, you need to join the Mormons." Right.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
Schnoebelen joins the Mormons with this idea that he's going to get the ultimate keys to power. And based on his conversations and lessons with the druid, he learns certain phrases and certain hand gestures
Mhm.
that he begins to use once he moves into the Mormon church.
Mhm.
And it's immediately recognized
Mhm.
by the Mormon hierarchy, and they bring him in because he understands the secret code to kind of what they're about.
Mhm.
And just to back up your point, Schnoebelen, who eventually leaves all this stuff, um, to back up your point, he is in confirmation that this is Luciferian. That he talks about this, like he has numerous talks on YouTube. So he's absolutely, in validation of what you're talking about,
Mhm.
that this is, the God that they ultimately are in practice and worship to. So, if you ever get bored and you want to go deeper down the rabbit hole, this guy's got a ton of information of
It would.
experience around
I
that
think it would
time.
really like connect some dots for me that I have my experience, and I'm pretty loyal to speaking to it, and I'm also very open to say I didn't have that experience, but I've heard this, or I know others that have that kind of thing. So this would be really educational for me, and I would actually go down there. One of the things that does back that up as this church being a Luciferian church, I've said before also, and this is where kind of the MK Ultra, like the connection with the government comes in and the mind control, that it's a social experiment that actually went really well. Like
Mm.
it has been so successful in the methods, the methodology, the practices, and the application that people don't they just don't recognize it. And I would say that the Mormon Church has been kind of this best kept secret of the unit of the brotherhood of um, this entire organization that's worldwide, basically. And the thing that backs that up for me now is the reports and the revelations that are coming forward about how much money the church has in one investment account. The one
Hmm.
investment account has over $100 billion in it.
It's a lot of money, a
It's
lot of money.
it's a lot of money, but I think that's what I really want to help people understand. It's like that's not the church, that's one investment account. They own ranches, they own farms, they own properties, they own other things that aren't reported. And in my mind, I'm thinking, and this is just supposition, but there's this great cover with these young men and young women that are going out as missionaries, as kind of, they're like the J-Dubs or whatever kind of
Right.
idea. So it's kind of been this, you know, really, they've allowed it to be this untapped, okay, they're just Mormons kind of superficial thing, while the Mormons are very, very ingrained and very much in their own loyalty of being the one true chosen church by God, and they have the higher knowledge and all of the things that we were told are still told, chosen generation, things that you'll probably hear in other Masonic or even other cults that bring people into feeling special. And there's huge programming around feeling special and feeling like the one and feeling God chosen and all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
And then they back it up with like, and we have prophets, God's talking to them now. And we have our own book of scripture that was interpreted and, you know, like found specially. And like, just this kind of like, we're leveling up. And in a human mind, it's like, well, that makes a lot of sense. I could see that. I mean, you know, if I was a God, I would do that too, kind of idea.
Right.
So you will be finding those kind of things, but it's been so hidden that in my mind, I'm thinking the church is basically money laundering for the entire organization. They're in charge of the money, and they're in charge of the church itself has a very specific role for the brotherhood, which is money and providing people, children. They just there are women that are definitely programmed and earmarked to be make babies. Basically, what is it called? I can't remember the word that's used, but
we'll call them breeders.
Breeders, that's it. Yeah. So as a breeder, you don't have to go to a full-term pregnancy. It depends on what they want that child's DNA for, right? If it's your egg or not, if it's somebody else's sperm, if you're artificially inseminated, if you've had something implanted, if you were raped, and then you've got something a baby coming forward. What do they want to use that fetus for? Do they want it to come full term? What do they, like the whole thing is like, that's also planned. So they will perform abortions to access, fetuses, the material there, the blood there, the whole thing, traumatize and terrorize the woman, basically the girl, the child. I had an abortion performed on me as well. And I was present with 3 other girls that were in the same room, and it was all going on. And I was watching and witnessing and experiencing that. So we each had view of each other, but, like a different view of each other. And the whole thing was also really, really set up well. But yeah, the breeders are going to be there to provide children on a lot of different levels for all kinds of things. And then there's the LDS Social Services, which also holds, adoption agency. It also houses therapists or counseling to help people if they're coming in with these like issues before they even start accessing memories. And sometimes the therapists themselves are part of not just the programming, but they're part of the group. And so they witness who's coming in so they can track them and get them reprogrammed and report to their handlers and say, you need to go reprogram this person, or they just kind of keep them in there and just kind of make them a little bit crazy. Like, what is this? So they keep them in a cycle and keep them in the system without really releasing them, or they'll put them up at the state hospital in the psych ward or whatever. Or if you're really getting out of hand, they'll create a situation where your murder will be staged in front of other people, so the rest of us can be terrorized and programmed into recognizing that if you try and get out of the system, this is where you end up.
Wow. The Mormons are freaks with ancestry and bloodline and DNA. And I never really I know that there's this idea that through your ancestry and bloodline and all that they could all be saved. And like, there's a big part of that in the the orthodoxy of the church, or the theology of the church. But I'm also wondering if that also plays a role with how people are picked.
Oh, right? Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. The more they can know about who you are, the bloodline, it's all, in your bloodline. This is going to be like a DNA physical bloodline that they're tracking and watching. And I remember my grandmother, my dad's side, my paternal grandmother, boasting a number of times. I didn't, this was kind of normal to hear her say, oh yeah, our family comes from a place over in Poland. I think it was, at the time it was Poland. I'm not sure if that even the borders moved.
It's probably the Prussia, Austria, Hungarian Empire, whatever.
Exactly.
Poland's changed hands so many times, and had a number
Right,
of
right. But we had a
names.
castle.
Yeah,
She was just really excited. Like our family has a castle over there. And I was like, we have a castle? What does that mean? That's cool. Like it was
right,
just kind of this magical thing. But I mean, it didn't go much farther than that. But if you were going to track it back far enough and say, okay, we come from royalty, or we come from this line or that line or whatever, that's also going to play into if you're a breeder, if you're going to be a leader,
right.
how they're going to utilize you, what your talents are. And it's very telling. And the seduction there too is, hey, come do temple work and let's get your genealogy going. And you go on your own dime across the sea and you find the graveyards and start finding your generational like ancestors. Bring all this information back. And this is the way it was done before, any kind of internet and computer stuff. People would actually pilgrimage to find people that they
Yep.
were related to bring back this information.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that plays into it huge. And now we've got, oh my gosh, ancestry.com and 23andMe and all of these things where it's like, hey, how about you just donate that to us? Give us your information so we can tell you who you come from, which is kind of like soothing and kind of cool. And I belong and whatever it is that you're looking for.
Right.
And now they have your DNA.
Yeah. Is it ancestry.com run by the Mormons, or did they sell it, or they had one of those websites that they were behind?
I've heard, and you can double check this, it was created privately. Then the LDS church had something to do with it. And now I think BlackRock owns it.
BlackRock.
BlackRock, sorry. Yeah, BlackRock owns it.
That makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
total sense. Okay. So when did you start waking up?
I woke up when I got depressed. It was 2003. My husband and I had just finished building the second home that I was a general on, and I was kind of doing the general stuff, but I had hired we had hired a man to kind of help.
What year was this?
We completed it in 2003, so it started in 2002, which was when all the Olympics were going on in Utah and that kind of thing.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So that has a lot to do with other connections, and oh my gosh, there's so much there. But anyway, so once this project was completed, two things happened. There was one triggering that will take us off into a whole different story that we could talk about at another point, but that I got triggered in one way, which triggered me into depression. So I was done with this project, and for some reason and I do know why, but it really it hit a program inside of me. It hit a personality inside of me that I was still unaware that I even had, multiple personalities.
Right.
That kind of overtook everything, and I just dropped into a massive amount of depression, but it was very, very apathetic. And so I was still functioning as a mother of 6 children. I was still functioning as a wife. I was still functioning as I was very high functioning, member of the church. I was still doing all the things, but I had no emotion around anything, which was terrifying to me because I was going from, I'm a gregarious, outgoing, kind of happy person, into depression. But I was never the person that couldn't get out of bed. I was just this person like, I freaking don't care about anything. And to get into that kind of an apathy where everything is just kind of a blank and an absence, I can look at now and I can say that is a very possible landing place for perhaps a new program or new personality to be, kind of created from. I don't know for sure. I wasn't being necessarily accessed quite, a lot then, but it just really went into a huge depression. And so I would dissociate a lot, meaning I could see myself being depressed and I didn't understand. So it was like I would stand outside my body and witness myself in this really unfamiliar place. So I went looking for help, and I didn't get super public with looking for help. I was trying to figure out what to do next. And I knew 100% I could not see a therapist. And that's just part of the Mormon programming. If you have issues, you got to go to the bishop. God's going to be the one to help you. You don't necessarily need to have therapy, that's not your first line of defense. You want to come to God. You want to come to God through, your local ecclesiastical leader. And I was like, ain't no way that just doesn't feel in line for me. So I asked a friend of mine. She and I had kind of become friends over the last couple of years, and she suggested this particular therapist that I ended up going to see. And I was terrified because I was kind of breaking one of the rules. And turned out that he was actually an expert in satanic ritual abuse in the Mormon church.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily for me too, is that she'd had some training in this, her own personal training in it. And so she was actually seeing some patterns in me. And she's like, how about I hand you this name of this guy I know, and I had no idea. But the triggering is what kind of started. So I started waking up in 2003 to what was going on, what I was born into, kind of what the family dynamic was.
Mm-hmm.
And it took about a year before I started really pulling up stuff about the church. And that memory I had, that memory was really confusing to me because it was a public skinning of a man that had tried to break away. And so the memory was terrifying anyway. But they had
so they actually skinned a dude in
Oh,
front
yeah.
of people.
in front of it was a group of people, and I would say probably 100 people, maybe a little less. But people were called to be at this particular ceremony. And it was in Ogden, and it was outside on somebody's private property, and it was surrounded by trees. And they gave all the children, this is what I remember, they gave all the children what I called, as I was getting the memory, I was into that child awareness. And it was they were giving us blue candy. And I just remember not eating all of it. I was just I don't want this, right? So knocked the kids out. We just all passed out. But because I didn't eat the whole dose because it was a drugging, I woke up kind of in the middle of all of this, and all the kids were kind of sleeping over on this side in this tight grouping. And I just remember waking up and seeing everybody dressed in white. I know now they were all in, Mormon temple clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember looking up, there was a platform at the front, and I remember looking up there just going, God, I've seen these guys before. As I'm pulling this memory forward, I was like, I think they're kind of celebrities. I know them. I don't know. So it wasn't here they are, here's their name. It was who is this up there? And I'm like, gosh, I think it looks like this person or that person. But then it was what are they doing? And it was terrifying because I was watching what they were doing as they were skinning this man, and he was screaming. It was terrifying. And the thing about that was, again, it was a demonstration of, this is what happens if you try to tell. This is what happens if you try to leave. This guy has clearly crossed the line. And so now we're doing this public execution, basically, is what it was. So,
what was the methodology for you to uncover the memories? Did they just happen spontaneously? Was there hypnotherapy involved?
it was hypnotherapy. Yeah.
Okay.
And I had no problem with that because I had been kind of pushing the envelope in my whole Mormon theology anyway, by exploring past life regression. So for about 3 years before I ever got to that point, I was actually actively working on remembering my own past lives. And I had a friend, and we were just kind of playing around with it. It wasn't wow, let's do this. It was more well, I've heard about this and we've read this book, and should we try? Let's see if it's even possible. It was just kind of this very playful, there's not a lot at stake here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was the one that was kind of the guinea pig, and she was the one that was walking me down a path and, doing that kind of thing. I was listening to what it was. And I just popped right in. I would just go to these memories. And for me, it was really, it wasn't difficult, but it was very detailed. it was in full color, and I could identify sounds and tastes, and I could even identify people, even though they were in different bodies. It's kind of like, oh, that's so and so, because we have these soul signatures, right? So
Right.
it was kind of cool. It was like, wow, okay, we're playing around with this. So getting to the point where, you know, when the therapist was like, I use hypnotherapy to access these memories. I'm like, cool, familiar, not afraid.
Right.
And so that was the method he used. And so with the intention of, I want to know what is at the root of me being depressed, I actually was going into it thinking I was going to pop into a past life, going, oh, well, you know, it's connected to this thing or that thing.
Right.
And I went right to a baby blessing. I went to right to a satanic Mormon ritual around my birth and this blessing. And I came out of that session going, that was weird. Like, I don't know what that was. Maybe it's symbolic. Like, I still wasn't like suddenly aware, like, oh my gosh, what is this? This is crazy. It was more like, yeah, okay, we work in symbolism sometime, and I hate scary movies, so I'm sure it's not me pulling up something that I'd just seen. I'll go back again. I'm going to see what this is, because that is wild symbolism to see my family and my dad there. So it's got to mean something, you know, like I just wasn't jumping into, here's what the issue is. So it took a couple of times, and then and this is what's so interesting. I was the kind of person, and perhaps it was from the training I had or given myself, but each session I could go back to where I left off from the week before and continue the story until the session or the memory was complete. So I was being really thorough. Instead of kind of jumping to different ages and different experiences, I'd jump into one thing, get all the details, and then I was complete. And then I would go into a different memory, and it could be at a different age. I didn't go like, you know, birth 1, 2, 3, 4. I was like birth, you know, 7,
Right.
6, you know, whatever.
It wasn't chronological.
It wasn't chronological, correct, but it was concise. It was complete. Yeah.
Wow, that's really, really powerful. Now, my next question is: as you're waking up, you're married, you have 6 kids, right?
Yep.
Did your thoughts go to this place? Oh my God, has this happened to my kids?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, because I was seeing what was going on with me and how skilled, and I'm taking it to the family level, how skilled my family was at just even creating family reunion events around trauma and terror and ceremony. I was like, you know, gosh, I wonder if this has happened to my kids. Me getting any of my own memories with my children did not happen until near the very end of the 9 years that I was in therapy.
So you're in therapy for 9 years. That's a you know, long time, very long time. And then eventually you did have some memories surface that included your children.
Yes. But before that, because I was in the practice of understanding that we hold all the answers for ourselves, because we have our own memories and we know our own story and where we're locked into trauma or something that is like really entangled and entwined in our lives right now. I was really aware that when my kids would approach me with something that seemed way off, that I thought, you know what, this could actually be something that they're being triggered by. And I wonder about this. So, and I was able to, my oldest son came to me. He got triggered by a first kiss. He went on a date, really excited, cute gal, whatever. First kiss, he had a complete meltdown in his own way. I don't know how well he held it together until he dropped her off and came home. And I had established enough of a relationship with my children that he felt safe enough to come and say, Mom, I don't know what happened. This doesn't seem right. And he went through this scenario, and he's like having this, you know, like visceral reaction to a first kiss that I'm like, that seems really weird, because the whole thing was wrong to him. All of it was wrong.
Hmm.
And so I asked him, I says, you know what, this sounds a lot like something that I've experienced before when I get triggered. And I says, I'm actually really working on, as you know, like the kids knew I was in therapy. I'm like, because I'm digging this stuff up in therapy. Would you be interested in some counseling? And he goes, yeah, I would. So connected him with somebody that I trusted. He started a process. And then his younger brother came in. He says, it's working for older brother. Do you think I could do that too? And I'm like, yeah. And so pretty soon each child was coming forward saying, can I try that? And all of them, independent of each other, were starting to get memories of my dad or my ex-husband's family, their grandma or whatever.
Right.
And so I don't have all the details on that because again, it's their story and it's their privilege of what they want to share, when,
Sure.
if, ever.
Sure.
But in for about 6 years of the 9, I had all my children in counseling, working on what they needed to bring forward. And it was pretty incredible. Yeah, it was pretty incredible.
So you said ex-husband.
Right. Yeah.
So you were no longer married to the father of your children, but is that correct?
That's correct. The therapy created an opening for me to heal on so many levels that the woman that I was when we were married was not the same person that was willing to continue being treated the way I was being treated in the marriage. And even though I would share a little bit of what was going on with me, and my husband was great he was willing to pay for so much therapy because everything was private pay.
Yeah.
And really, we actually just kind of looked at this whole thing once I got into the whole church thing. And I'm like, why are we paying tithing to these guys? I'm like, let's put that into therapy because we've got to continue.
So was your husband LDS?
Yeah. We were both LDS. We were married in the temple. The kids were born and raised in the church. I still have 3 of them that are attending church. I have 3 that aren't. I mean, they're all on their own journeys with this. But yeah, we were, in fact, our marriage was arranged by my grandfather and his grandfather because the way they structure things. So that also played into it. But I was starting to have memories of his family, of the arrangements and the programming and the conditioning and the, like the things I had to go through to qualify to be, like married to him, and things we had to go through together, and some abuse that was going on that way. And I was like, your family's involved, dude. Like, you need to go in and get your memories too. And he's like, no, I don't, I'm sure there's nothing there. And I'm like, yeah, there is. I've seen you. And it was just not anything that at the time he could even kind of put his arms around. And so
he was accepting of your own process.
He was accepting of it, but wouldn't step into it himself. And
right.
And he's still in that place where he's not, well, I think now he doesn't necessarily, I think he thinks I'm a little bit crazy, but I don't know.
Right.
But the point is, it did end up in divorce, and we went through marriage counseling and family counseling and all of this stuff, but it just turned into a thing that was just not going to work well anymore. So the marriage ended back in 2012.
2012. And that was really what, like the end of your therapy too, right? That's
it
the
was
9-year period. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, then it went from being a stay-at-home mom that was mothering 6 children into, guess what you get to do is you get to take care of yourself and figure this out. And I was like, wow, this is new for me, because I'd never really I'd been more of a kept woman, I guess. I don't know if I like that terminology, but the church does create a hierarchy for, if you get married early, the men go on the mission, and maybe the girls do too. But, if you're getting married in your early 20s, late teens, the job of the female is to support the male. So he goes and gets his education. Maybe she gets hers too. But the point is, girls have babies, stay home, raise the family. Guys go out and provide for the family. And so there's not a lot of skill set that you could put on a resume after 25 years of being married that says, hey, I'm valuable, please hire me, outside of a $12 an hour or $10 an hour job. Right. I mean, and I even have a degree, but at the time it was like, not very helpful at all. So there's a way that I know more women than not that are like, they get divorced and they come out and they're like, I was a mom. Is there anything that qualifies me beyond being a mom? Like,
well, moms can do a lot of stuff. The moms they're like Swiss Army knives.
they really are.
And they're very adaptable, and it's they're not underqualified to do things in the world. Let's put it that way.
I would agree with you, but the conditioning of the mindset is your value rests in these levels,
right?
As a mother, as a member of the church, as a wife, so there's not a lot that's really fostered in how I contribute is valuable in these ways. Now, I'm not saying that that's across the board and everybody feels that way. I'm not like making this blanket statement. I'm just saying that that's part of the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are very invested in that foundation,
mm-hmm.
then you're going to come out of a divorce, probably not with the most optimal situation for yourself as a female.
I know I'm asking a personal question, and you don't have to answer it if it's too personal, but how did your kids deal with the divorce?
Oh man. The hard thing about it was terrifying on a lot of levels, because I gave you the setup. I'm
mm-hmm.
healing, children are healing, dad is, paying for all of it. Right. And what that also resulted in is for me, was a very real systematic closing the gap of, there's not a lot of friends that I connect with anymore. There's not a lot, like I was really involved in this, in creating this kind of little galaxy of healing. And that was our lives for a while. And it was thorough and it was great. But when I chose to leave, that stability, the thing that I anchored, busted everything apart. And the kids were terrified, confused. My daughter didn't talk to me for a while. And that all of that was really devastating for me. And then I found out that the kids had been told, or there had been some kind of information delivered to them. And I was told this by my kids, that they had a suspicion, or they had wondered if the cult had gotten a hold of me and reprogrammed me so that I would divorce their dad. And so now I'm not even safe. They don't know. Is mom programmed? Is she being accessed? Would she access us? What are we going to do? And so it's a legitimate fear, right?
Yeah, sure.
So for a long time, and I'm talking on a kind of years, like there was kind of this dance of, is she safe? Is she not? Who is she? I know how I feel in my heart about her. If she is genuine, she's not changed. I don't know what's going on here. I'm going to trust this. I'm not, I don't know. So whatever their own experiences were with it, it was kind of this family destruction that happened. And on the positive side of that, the one thing I did know is that I could hold my integrity that I knew was really solid, be the mom, be the woman, be the soul, be the person from the heart that I was being, and always let them know that I was, they are welcome. And those relationships came back by their choice. And because they chose that, the relationship is actually stronger than it's ever been. And it's really with each of them, it's really valuable and very dear to me.
Good.
Yeah.
A couple of asides. I knew this one guy. I wouldn't say we were friends, but we were kind of friends. And he was much older than me. I was working at this apartment complex in California. And so, we kind of socialized a little bit. He was ex-special forces. And one night he had did you ever see Apocalypse Now? Have you ever seen the beginning with Martin Sheen? Right. He goes into the drunken frenzy, the Willard scene. This guy does that. He gets completely shit-faced and starts like just telling me things that I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. Right. So he said this one thing. And by the way, I'm going to say it. This is not my opinion. This was what he shared with me. He's a special forces dude, and they're ginned up to do things that, the regular army can't or won't do.
Mhm.
And in his drunken stupor, he says to me, "You know, the two best goddamn soldiers are?" I said, "No, who?" He said, "Blacks and Mormons." And I said, "Why?" He
Yeah.
says, "Because blacks had no fear. They do anything. And Mormons would follow an order. They would follow an order to a T."
Mhm.
And it was like, okay, there you go.
Mhm.
There's a little bit of like truth in that statement. Am I right?
For the Mormons, I can't speak for the
Yes.
Blacks, but for the
Right.
Mormons,
Mormons, yeah.
100%, yes. The training, this is where mind control comes in, and a desire to please. So if you have enough programs in place in a religion that is built to please God,
Mhm. Yeah.
then following things to the T is going to be rewarded in ways that you will recognize now, or you will be rewarded later. But the also on the flip side of that, part of that programming that gets set up is fear of not following, fear of what won't happen or what might be taken away or what the consequence might be. And if you especially wrap MK Ultra, or if you wrap satanic ritual abuse into any of those, you will already have a program
Mhm.
in place where, and this happened to me a lot, so I can actually speak from experience. If you don't perform to the T,
Mhm.
something gets killed in front of you and it's your fault.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Got a comment here from Cece.
Mhm.
She said, "I heard there are a lot of Mormons in the Secret Service."
Mhm. Yeah, I understand that the government, all the letter, factions of the government, hire heavily from a Mormon population, from the Mormon pool, for that
Mhm.
very reason. And there's already a lot of conditioning, and there's a lot of people that are victims of SRA. So whether they're actively aware of it or not, it can be they can pull a personality forward if that individual has been programmed or conditioned well enough that they would be great. And on top of that, with all the Mormon missionaries that go out through the world learning languages, living in those countries for 2 years and coming back with fluency and also knowledge of areas
Right,
and
right.
connections with people that are, he might be from Texas and you might be from Canada, but we were companions on this mission in, Fiji or wherever it was. The communication is kind of almost hard to track too. So if you have, and this does happen, you have an individual that's on a mission that is highly programmed, and you have an individual that is put with them as a companion or as their mission president or whatever, that turns into being their handler, then there's all kinds of things that can be accomplished with that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that makes sense. The other thing that occurred to me, I was just doing the math. It was like your world kind of ended in 2012. So
mhm,
you kind of carried out the mind prophecy, right?
I did.
You were the holder of the mind prophecy because your world ended in 2012.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's actually a really true statement. As far as the Mayan prophecy, I'd never kind of overlaid that, but that is actually, for me, that is really what happened. I through this process, I will say, I mean, I lost everything. There were things
Yeah.
that I gained, but it was kind of like, let's just wipe the slate clean. And it was brutal. That was
Mhm.
really hard because I lost my birth family. I lost my religion. I lost my identity. I lost my marriage. I lost my kids in a way where they were just like, nope, we don't know, Mom.
Mhm.
And I lost the way I was being supported. Everything was gone. And yet, whatever moxie or grit or intestinal fortitude that was part of who I am kicked in. It was just there. It was just there. And it's not to say that my lessons haven't been difficult. I mean,
Right.
it's been quite a lesson of living for the last 12 years since that divorce. But yeah, there's been more clearing and everything. But yeah, I mean, you're right. My world ended in 2012.
Right. Right. Well, thanks for taking that on for us. We all
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it.
You're welcome. I'm here for you.
So I did a little research because theoretically that's what we're supposed to do when we have a guest on and do these shows. So I did a little research, and I found this interesting article that came up on the Chicago Tribune of 1991.
Okay.
So this is a very interesting period for the church
Mm-hmm.
because there seems to have been like a precursor and a first wave of people that were coming out with these stories right around this time,
Mm-hmm.
and the kind of the 91 period. And there's a guy by the name of Glenn L. Pace. Are you familiar with him?
I am. Yep.
I'm going to bring this up for people to kind of witness here, because it gives a lot of credence to what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And once I show this, I want to be able to get your comment on this article and on the Pace materials. Can we get maybe 1 sec here? Let's go here and let's go here. And here's the article. So this is from 1991, which is amazing to find something on the internet now from 1991. It's not easy, to be honest.
Wow.
So Mormon affiliated group linked to rituals of devil worship occult. This is by James Coates in the Chicago Tribune. Salt Lake City. Top officials of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints say they're investigating reports from members that as children they witnessed human sacrifices and suffered satanic abuse at the hands of renegade Mormon affiliated cliques. But that's an interesting statement. So what is being proposed here is that there are renegade cliques inside the church and not the church in its entirety. Do you agree with that or not?
The report, I think, was accurate, and he probably went as far as he could. There's definitely, I mean, I don't agree with it. It's church-wide.
Okay.
It's from the top. Yeah.
And I'm not trying to get you in a gotcha mode. I just want to know what your opinion is, because that's a really interesting point, right?
Right.
It's
the setup is already happening. So you need to see that. There's the setup. Oh, it's just, one bad apple or, 3 bad apples or
right.
Whatever. That's a big deal. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So Glenn L. Pace, a member of the church's 3-man presiding bishopric, reported in a memorandum dated July 19th, 1990. This is going all the way back to 1990. And you mentioned this period on Freeman's show called the Satanic Panic. And that's when you get into the whole McMartin story and everything that was kind of going down. And by the way, just an aside, brief aside, I was hanging out with this guy in California for a while. He was a friend of mine. He was a therapist. And somebody asked, what is SRA? They asked us in chat. And SRA stands for Satanic Ritual Abuse, just to put that out there, clarify that. So this was a guy, he was a friend of mine. I hung out with him a lot. And he was not a woo guy. Like, he was not a woo guy. But because he was a psychiatrist, he had patients that were basically bringing their SRA past to him. And we had this discussion one day, and he started to talk about some of them, and he didn't name any names. So he wasn't breaking any privacy sort of, rules or standards. And so I asked him, I said, is this really a thing? He says, absolutely. Absolutely, it's a thing. And that kind of blew my mind, because I knew that that's not who he was, right? So for him to have that kind of, resume with dealing with people who had very similar stories, and him being this kind of non-woo guy who checks that box and says, yes, it's true. It's like, okay, there's something here. So that was just an aside. Let me continue this. Pace wrote that he is personally convinced at least 800 church-affiliated Satanists now are practicing occult rituals and devil worship in the Salt Lake Valley. Many of them, he added, pose as devout Mormon leaders and include bishops, a diocese priest, a president rather, patriarchs, and I guess once you graduate from deacon status, you become a patriarch, temple workers, members of the church's young women, young men's groups, and even members of the world famous Mormon Tabernacle Choir.
Mhm.
I remember them. Not only do some of the perpetrators represent a cross section of the Mormon culture, but sometimes the abuse has taken place in our own meeting houses. Pace wrote to the committee set up by patriarchs to investigate behavior that weakens the 8 million member church. However, Pace wrote he made a point of asking the victims to identify their tormentors only by their church rank. He gave no reason for this. Church spokesman Don Lefevre, or Don LaFay, there's a couple ways of pronouncing that name, said he did not know if Pace reported his findings to law enforcement officers. Pace added he was traveling in South America and is not available for interviews. We'll say Lefevre noted that many law enforcement officials have expressed skepticism about Pace's allegations of widespread satanic abuse. He appeared to share that view. It seems to me that even though one actual case is tragic and is one too many, the reports of ritualistic killings are likely overblown, whether they be in connection with members of our church, of other churches, or any other segment of society, none of which is immune. So basically, if you were saying, hey, it happens, other people do it, so it's kind of okay that other people do it, and it's not as big as we think. Mm-hmm. Sergeant Don Bell, chief of the Salt Lake Police Department's intelligence unit, said his office receives about half a dozen reports alleging satanic abuse each year, but there are no reports of finding the body of a sacrifice victim. I have no doubt whatsoever that these people described during satanic ritual abuse are victims of some very profound type of abuse, Bell said, but I do not believe that there is an intergenerational network of Satanists active in this valley. In 20 years of doing law enforcement work in the city, I am unaware of any case where we had some sort of cult and part of the ritual was to sacrifice children, conduct human sacrifices, drink human blood, or any of those bizarre things. On the other hand, I can cite case after case where we have contact with mental health care professionals who have a patient who tells them that they witnessed a sacrificial killing or something and have convinced the psychologist or whatever that it really did happen. So on the one hand, he's saying, yeah, it happened, maybe. But there's a lot of maybe pseudoscience involved, and there's a lot of people that are convincing them that this did happen. Pace's memo marked "Do Not Reproduce" at the top was made public last week by anti-Mormon crusaders Gerald and Sandra Tanner, who also played a key role in publicizing the so-called White Salamander letter. The letter, which Gerald Tanner exposed as a forgery, made it appear that the church founder Joseph Smith had been involved in folk magic and satanic rites in the early 1800s when he wrote the Book of Mormon. Mark Hoffman, who had forged the letter and sold it to church elders, is now an inmate at Utah State Prison. 2 people were killed in pipe bomb attacks mounted by Hoffman. Of the Pace memo, Sandra Tanner said last week, we do not know that these tales of satanic rituals and human sacrifices are true. But we do know that Pace is a very high-ranking church official, and we know that the memo in question is authentic and therefore of great interest to all people concerned about Mormonism, but those inside the church and those on the outside. Pace had written, also, he was skeptical of the allegations, so he spent a year interviewing survivors of the rituals, many of whom suffer multiple personalities and other psychological problems commonly associated with child abuse. When 60 witnesses testify to the same type of torture and murder, it becomes impossible for me personally not to believe them, the bishop wrote. The Satanist ceremonies are often based loosely upon the Mormon Church's own rituals, Pace wrote. For example, the Mormon Church verbiage and gestures are used in satanic ritualistic ceremony in a very debased and often bloody manner. He wrote, when the victim goes to the temple, and here's the exact words, horrible memories are triggered. The memories seem to come in layers. For example, the first memory might be of incest. Then they remember robes and candles. Next, they realize that their father or mother were both present when they were being abused. Another layer will be the memory of seeing other people and even killed. Then they remember having seen babies killed. Another layer is realizing they participated in the sacrifices. One of the most painful memories may be that they even sacrificed their own baby. Mm-hmm. The church's ruling 3-man first presidency, led by Ezra Taft Benson, Mormonism's ruling patriarch, sent a letter to local church leaders September 22nd, my birthday, warning about Satanism. We express our love and concern to innocent victims who've been subjected to these practices by conspiring men and women, the letter said. It warned all church members not to affiliate in any way with the occult or those mysterious powers it espouses, and concluded these things should not be pursued as games, be topics in church meetings, or be delved into in private personal conversations. So there is a lot going on here in this story. A lot. First of all, everything that Pace is talking about, based on what I heard in your interview with Freeman, are the exact same things you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm assuming that in 1990, in the 90s, when this was happening, you weren't even aware of this. Am I right?
You're right. You're right. I was still being accessed.
Right.
Yeah.
So would it be safe to say then that when you started this process, that you were unaware of the paper trail here? Would that be true?
That would be very true. Yeah. I had no idea that this was even a thing.
Right. Okay. So there you go. Right. I mean, if you go back and listen to the Freeman interview, and we could kind of encapsulate that a little bit, you're talking about people in robes. You're talking about human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, blood. I mean, everything that you cover in that interview is exactly what these people had told Pace in the 90s.
Correct. Yeah. And what, I mean, when I walked into my therapy, my therapist, one of the first things he had, like, kind of some research material that you could take with you if you wanted for free, and the Pace memo was there. So back in 2003, I had my own copy of the Pace memo, reading this going, okay, I'm not too sure why this is pertinent to me, but wow. And then I was like, oh, I see why this is pertinent to me. But the thing that is fascinating about the way the article was written, and as far as the reporter chose to go in that, is it sets up, based on the interviews, it sets up the people, the victims, as potentially crazy, right? And then the official, which would be the police chief, is making his statement. I'm unaware of this, and I've been here for 20 years, and but we've seen people try to convince or successfully convince their therapists or their social worker or whatever that these things happen. And so he's really he's giving you the framework through which to look at this lens. And so, and it's relieving, because if people are going, oh my gosh, this is like here, and there's like over 800 people, and and they go down this list, and if they can frame it as, but it's just a few weird offshoots, and yeah, maybe it happens, and okay, let's say a few times it does, and yeah, there's going to be blood, but they're convincing. This really laid a foundation and framework for false memory syndrome to come in and find some footholds where people get to say, yeah, but those memories were implanted, or those therapists are trying to do this, or the victims are trying to manipulate that.
They establish a false memory syndrome with children, right? And that's how they establish it. And they would ask them very leading questions.
Yep.
And because they were children, they weren't aware of the fact that they were being manipulated, and the questions that they were being asked were ultimately going to lead them to a point where their inquisitors would be invalidating their stories, right?
Exactly.
So they actually were able to, attack that beachhead through children. Whatever happened to Pace? Do you know whatever happened to
so
him?
The way, if you want to track it, after he gave the report, submitted the report, and according to whatever I've read, he did, he was like in front of the first presidency, probably all 15, the 12 of them, or the 15 of them. He was reassigned to a different location. I understand it was an island. I can't tell you exactly which one, but he just since passed. They kind of just took him and got him out of the country.
Right.
And I don't know. I know that he had his own opinions, and from other conversations that I've had with people that have spoken to him, like, I'm third party on this one, so I'm not quoting exactly, but he did actually see deeper, and he did see the correlation, and he saw more, but all he could really report, probably to save his own skin in a way,
Right.
was what he gave forward. And with this, I know that assignment, I understand the assignment was given to him because people were coming forward saying, I've got these memories, or, something. There was reports coming forward, and what are you going to do about this, church? Because, God's talking to you and Satan's, killing people. And, so they gave him the assignment. And I think he went into it. I'm certain he was handpicked, and I'm certain he was not wrapped into anything as far as coming from a history of satanic ritual or anything like that. That's my opinion. I don't know that for sure.
Right.
But to be able to conduct those interviews and be kind of appalled, I think that would play in favor if he wouldn't have had any roots in any of this or even knowledge of or experience in it. He would be more likely to just couch it and kind of keep it contained, because it's appalling. Like, we as humans do not want this to be real. Like, if you can be soothed by a report saying, oh, the police chief has said it's not that big a deal,
Right.
then you're going to be like, oh, thank God. So this is why the satanic panic and some of the things that were coming forward back in the 90s, my therapist was involved in. He had to go underground because he was helping people actually pull memories up, because he had, decided to employ this new therapy called hypnotherapy, and people were like going right to situations, and he was seeing it blazingly, and people were starting to heal. But they also had reporter parts, and this is something that I've had to work through. It's like part of the programming is a reporter part that records everything and then reports to the handler or reports to whoever they need to, based on what they're, what information is being drawn from them. And so victims were also reporting on each other, and it was just what was coming forward was getting out of hand. So I think this was their response. It's like, well, we'll just tell Glenn Pace to take care of this interview, go do this investigation. However he formed it, I don't know what his structure was or why, but he was coming up with some pretty incriminating evidence. And I know that he spoke privately with one particular church official that was high up. I would say he was also an apostle that wasn't involved. And this individual has since passed as well, but I'm not at liberty to say his name. But they both were seeing what was going on, and both of them were released early and kind of put to pasture so that they wouldn't be really involved in a lot of stuff. And they were like, I want to save my family, because I know the families, part of the process of that would be threatening families. Again, I'm not saying what did happen to either one of those two, but that's still part of the pattern. Don't say anything or we're going to kill your daughter or whatever,
Right. So Fran's asking all the good questions today.
Oh,
She wanted to know, Cece, she wanted to know what happened with your relationship with your family.
Oh, wow. As soon as I realized, this was like in 2004. So I started therapy in 2003, and 6 months later, so I started in October, and then in April of 2004, I remember, gosh, I was just going over this, reading this, like in my papers that I wrote, but it came to be really clear to me that my family knew more about me than I knew about me. And I also knew that there were things about me that I still didn't understand. And as I was getting this information, it was going to be really important for me to to be a purist, to allow this, to allow my healing to be very organic and real. So I saw that I needed to cut off all relationship with them. So I did. And that was not an easy situation. It was not easy for me, meaning all kinds of triggerings were going on inside of me. So I had to actually write out a script for myself. I had to make the phone call. I had to stick to my script, because I just was so aware that if a keyword was dropped, or if a particular, attitude was kind of like, they knew how to direct me because my dad was my handler, right? So I just really had to stick to what I knew. And I went over that script with my therapist, and like we really refined it. I made the call, and I basically said, you're not invited to family events. I'm not going to be showing up to family events. I'm going through a really hard time now. This is the way it needs to be. You're not invited. I was really clear, like this is what happens. And I haven't initiated or spoken to my parents since 2004, unless they have shown up to a place like that happened back in 2014. they showed up to a place that I was at, and I was like, oh crap. But it was an exchange, and I remember driving away being like, I felt my entire body go into a triggering, like I just felt my body just flood with hormones, and I knew exactly what was going on. So that was really like validating, but it was also like, oh, okay, now I got to pull up some tools and deal with this. So that was important. But I haven't spoken to my parents since then. My siblings, on the other hand, I broke off relationship and contact with them for a number of years, and then it's kind of been eased back into at their pace, which is fine. But I also know that nobody else has done any healing. Nobody else is aware. Everything that they would have experienced is still repressed. They still kind of think I'm a little weird and crazy, but I also know that anything I say can and will probably be reported back. So I'm just, I'm in an awareness, but I'm not in fear with it. So, but I don't have a relationship with my parents. They're still active in it. My dad is still practicing it. So
I thought a lot about your revelations, your experience, and I'm checking the box that everything that you uncovered is true, right?
mm-hmm.
I'm checking that box.
Okay.
So, and I thought to myself, well, of course I'm not LDS, but if I was your husband and you were telling me these things, and I believed you
mm-hmm.
and believed those things to be true, my first response would be to kill your father. Mm-hmm. And I'm not lying. Okay.
Right.
And this, to me, it's like the most natural response I think any human could really have.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that theoretically this monster could never do that again. I'm just curious, did that discussion ever come up in your marriage?
Well, yes. And then let me kind of give some background around this too. One of the things that I was counseled by my therapist was to be very aware of anything I shared, because the desire was to not front load any other victim. And at this point, we didn't know who any other victim would be. Now, my therapist was pretty certain that my husband would have been involved and the kids would have been affected, but he didn't say that. He was just like, be very aware and very cautious of what you're sharing. And then he shared why. He's like, you don't want to front load them. And I said, well, what is front loading? And he says, well, if you tell, let's say, your kids that you were at this location and this happened and they happen to come up with a similar memory, they could highly invalidate what they were thinking or what they were pulling up, because the question is going to be, well, was this because I'm, like I just heard mom talk about it? Was this really mine? Like, these aren't exactly the most desirable memories to be pulling forward. And so, it was like, don't really be cautious and don't front load. And so as I'm getting further and further into this, and I'm seeing my husband and I'm seeing his family, and I recognize that our marriage was arranged and everything, I am bringing this forward, and I'm saying, look, I'm going to tell you, these church officials are involved, and you're involved, and your family's involved. I don't know to what extent. We know my family's involved. You've got to get into this. And I remember when he was at first, he found out I told him this, and he's like, I want to kill him.
There you go.
There was no follow through, because he was a victim. Like, there was no internal, how do we protect the family? Why don't we just grab everything and move out of state? And there was no really overt decision-making that was going on with that, because his own programming was still very active in not doing that. Mm-hmm. But he did. Yeah. He was really angry. He was very angry about it. And I would say you're correct. There was a very natural reaction to that, to like, how dare you? And then it kind of evolved into this thing where he had to work through the fact that I was used goods, which again was kind of offensive and wild. And then as we were learning more and more about my parts, I did have kind of people will call it a beta kitty program,
beta kittens. Yeah.
Yeah. So that program was coming forward. And I remember at one point he's like, why can't you pull that up when we're having sex? And I was like, you just said the most offensive thing to me that you could have ever said. And because I was still kind of like, no, man, that has nothing to do with this. But it was really weird. Like, that was still, as innocent as maybe that had been, it was still an exploitation statement for me in my healing. And I was just like, I don't even know how to respond to you. So there was a lot of things that I didn't share because of front loading. And also, I didn't really like, there's a lot of this is like, how do you share this? Like, how do you tell anybody this? Like, I'm even having a hard time going, like working with this until I was able to really like, let this get fully out and really going into the trauma actually extracts the trauma and heals the trauma. Like, it's not anchored in me anymore. And so one of the things that I'm recognizing is there may be a form of thought out there that you don't want to re-traumatize people because that would just be mean. And in my mind, I'm like, that keeps the system going. Like, you need to go and look for what it is that's holding you hostage. But and integration, like that's another thing I'm really a fan of, because I know that through my parts work and through the memory recovery and everything that I've done, those parts that were separate from me, that were isolated from me, have integrated. And that's the biggest platform for anything. If people want to know how this SRA, this Satanic Ritual Abuse, is affecting them, and they're not Mormon and they're not, the whole thing is all about isolation and power. If they can isolate you as a human through your own thought processes, from your family, from your neighbors, like if you feel like you have to do it all on your own, or whatever you've been, like influenced into thinking, the isolation makes you an easier target. And that's so key in everything.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, when I was growing up in elementary school, we had these reading tools, and they were called SRA.
Oh, I think I remember those. Yeah.
Standard, and then it was a standard reading achievement or standard reading assessment.
Yeah.
Something like that. And you go through all the different colors. They're all color coded. Right. And the whole idea was to get to the top of the color pyramid with the SRAs. Anyway, well, it's unanimous. Everybody in the chat loves you, and they all champion your courage to come forward. So when did you start talking about this?
So I started probably around 2000. People have known about it. Like, I'll drop it in individual conversations. I think I started really feeling more bold about in 2015. At bold meaning, I'm going to say this to this person because you feel safe and you might be able to, like have some, feedback for me or whatever. But more openly, probably in 2000. In 2001, I started a podcast. And the podcast is there as a platform for victims to feel validated. That was the biggest thing I needed. And I appreciate what my therapist did. He would say, yeah, like I'd come up with a memory and I'm going, I'm certifiable. What is this? This is crazy. And his comments would be, well, there's others that got the same thing. Like, he would never give me any information, which I'm really grateful for. But that kind of validation to think, oh, okay, there's other people out there that got this and saw that person and can, like got that memory, like that's cool. So that's one of the things that I thought would be really valuable in telling my story, and just starting a podcast with that and bringing other, like just saying, hey, if this resonates with you, if you happen to be a victim of this and you want to tell your story, you can do it anonymously. We can have a conversation. I'll put it out on the podcast. And then also for advocates that are actually helping people, helping SRA victims. And so that's going to get active again next month. I'm going to start loading up more episodes and telling more and more of my story. And that's just also a kind of indicative of my own evolution of my journey of bravery. Like my first actually recorded interview was back in 2019, probably about the same week. Well, it was next week. It was like near my birthday. In 2019, and I was going by a pseudonym, and I had my face wasn't there, and it was just like, so I'm ready to tell this. And the minute the recording ended, man, I was just like, I was a mess because I publicly put it out there. And I had to do a lot of work around that. But then later, I was requested to go on a different podcast, and she's like, well, your face is going to be there. And I thought, well, shoot, if people are going to see my face, then why am I doing a pseudonym? Like, I'll just put my name and my face out there and we'll just start with it. And it's just kind of evolved in my own moxie, my own bravery. So, yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's a good opportunity for us to segue into your astrological chart. You want to do that?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'd love that.
All right. So I think I may have done this once before with somebody, but it doesn't really, I forget who it was, but we're doing it now. And let me punch your chart up here.
Okay.
And I think I have everything correct. We got March 31st, 1966, 7:48 a.m. in Provo, right?
Yep, that's right.
All right. So the first thing that jumped out at me, of course, you're an Aries.
Yep.
And you're kind of typical of being an Aries. Yeah. And Aries, generally dare to go where no man or woman, go. I mean, that's just, when you think of, William Shatner, right? Who's the commander of the Star Trek Enterprise. Right. What does he say? The Star Trek Enterprise, to boldly go where no man has gone before. And William Shatner's an Aries. Right. So we can see this being played out on our small screens. And what really jumped out at me is your 12th house. And, that's where your sun is, and that's where your Mars is, and Juno's there, and Ceres is there. And if I were to, try to validate your experience through your chart, I would just look at your 12th house. Because with Mars, typically Mars in Aries or Mars in the 12th house represents hidden enemies, right? And violence, violence and male energy, right? Mars is a heavy duty male energy. And then you have the Mars Sun conjunction, which to me suggests you're pretty fearless, right? But when we look at your 12th house, what do we see? We see an intercepted house. So it starts off with Pisces, and then it ends in resolves itself in Taurus. So the intercepted house itself is interesting because in some ways it's hidden, right? It's the occulted space within the occulted house. So I'm like, here we go. Now we're having a very interesting discussion about things like violation, because it's all hidden, right? It's hidden from you. It's hidden from the rest of the world. And then we have what's called an inconjunct. And what do we have here, right? Mars, Aries, Pluto, Virgo, Uranus, Virgo, and inconjunct. And the inconjunct is a really interesting angle in astrology. There's a connection between planets in two signs that have no connection at all. Like Virgo and Aries have no connection unless that connection is at 150 degrees and falls within a 3-degree orb. And that's what we have here. So what is Pluto? You have Pluto in the 5th house. The 5th house is, when you're young and a child and growing up, you got Pluto and Uranus there. So your childhood with Uranus theoretically interrupted. And then Pluto, what do we deal with Pluto? We deal with sex. We deal with the underworld, and all this is retrograde, which means that at some point your childhood experience would be uncovered, right? I mean, clearly with a retrograde, you're going to go back. You're going to figure out like what happened, right? And there, if I were to do astrological forensics on your story and your chart, just with this and this aspect alone, it fleshes out. It fleshes out. We see a lot of the heavy duty, in some ways, religious influence here in the 11th house. This is the community, right? So, you grew up in a religious community, and Saturn is the father, and we have a Chiron conjunction with the father. And what you have is a deeply wounded father. Right. And we have the father here with Saturn opposing Pluto. Boom. There's another tell. Also, people that have Chiron in Pisces, their wound is heretical, right? They go against the religion generally that they're born into, but then they usually have to come out the other side and reformulate their own kind of religious and spiritual beliefs. And even your Mercury, which is retrograde in
Mhm.
Pisces, what do? You do hypnotic regression, right? And it's moving backwards into this space in the wounded father. So, I mean, right. And this is a cold read. And I'm
Mhm.
just looking at your chart going, man, your life is all over this chart. I mean, all over this chart. And then you also have what's interesting, the true node, which is important in astrology, and it's conjunct Algol. So part of your life purpose is to speak, right?
Mhm.
Is to push things through your throat and your voice, which is difficult. And the other side of Algol, because it represents, one losing one's head from one's body,
Mhm.
is I think it is also in a lot of ways very much connected to cutting off your relationship with your family, right? That's very kind of algoic in some ways.
Mhm.
And by doing that, you're actually able to speak to that. I think it's going to be very interesting when Uranus conjuncts your true node next year. And I'm wondering if you're going to have some form of reconnection with your family, like reconnecting the head and the body again. And it might be very spontaneous, and it may be something that you don't even do.
Mhm.
You may not even have to do it. It may just kind of automatically happen on its own, and then you get to deal with how that works or what that looks like. So this is a really interesting chart, and just from this level, and I could tell where family is really important to you.
Mhm.
And so walking away from your brothers, sisters, um, cousins, nephews, grandparents, I can see where that'd be really difficult. I mean, you have the full moon and not the full moon, you have the moon in Leo in the fourth house, right? And all the things that go along with the moon in Leo in the fourth house and feeling proud about your family. I'm sure prior to all this, you might have felt proud about your family and
Mhm.
like, yeah, look at them. They're good people. Look what they accomplished. And so for you to go through this whole experience was probably not very easy. And even going through a divorce with Moon and Leo, but ultimately you'd find your own autonomy there. Anyway, this is a very, very interesting chart. And, I don't want to, belabor the point here too much, but your experience is all over this chart.
You- I love that you actually said that and validated it. Back in 2011, I sought out an astrologer, friend of a friend or whatever, and I showed up to her place, and she was an elderly woman. And the first thing that she gave me a cup of tea, and she said, "What happened to you when you were a child?" And I'm like, "What? Is that on there?" And it was kind of the same thing. Like, she was seeing the whole thing. She goes, "Yeah, a lot to do with your dad, right? And like authorities." And I was just mind blown because I'd gone through all of this already, healed so much, and I didn't necessarily think that kind of detail
Mm-hmm.
would show up in my chart, but it, based on what you're saying and what she told me even back then. I mean, I was going to her saying, "I think I need to get a divorce. I mean, this is really heavy." And she's like, "Oh, well, there's this." And she pointed out the whatevers. And she's like, "Typically when I see this planet here at this time," and she'd done a progressive, chart and whatever. And she's like, that typically indicates that. And for me, that kind of outside validation, even though
Mm-hmm.
inside, everything inside of me knew, like, I cannot stay in this relationship. This is going to go nowhere. And it wasn't, and speaking to the divorce, it wasn't from any other situation other than it dawned on me one day when he and I were in marriage counseling. And whatever the exchange was, it hit me square on that he was like, his point of view made sense and it was so reasonable to him. Like, and when you have an individual, and this is like, with humans, when you have
Mm-hmm.
an individual whose perception makes sense to them, there's zero motivation to see it any other way. And I had this, like confirmation and also this compassion, like, oh man, I guess we're getting divorced because I've got no desire to stay here. And he has no desire to to change. And so instead of like coming at it, at least for me, coming at it from a wounded place where, I felt like I was so, like whatever victim words could be going on. I really just saw that as it was just the next step. I'm just like, wow, this really isn't going to change. And my choice is, do I want to now step into a lifetime of being the spouse that would kind of help the person along until they chose to actually see it differently? And maybe then they would choose to do therapy, and maybe how are they going to, I was just like, man, that's a wild card I'm not willing to play. I've got to play the cards on me and step forward. And I have no idea how this is going to turn out. And a lot of people are going to be hurt, but I know what I need to do for myself. So that's what I did. And here I am 12 years later.
There you are. All right. And we appreciate your forward motion.
Thank you.
In your life to go where no man or woman has gone before. All right. Any closing comments? Anything you want to tell people about? Any websites?
Sure.
Any YouTube channels? Anything that you want to share with us?
Wow. Yeah. You can find me. My podcast is called Letters to the People, and it's on your favorite podcasting outlet. But if you want to go to my website, it's one word, letterstothepeople.com. And you can listen to the podcast that I've dropped. I've got a blog that I work on to add more information to it. I'm going to be releasing more and more details, and that's the deeper I go. I'll probably drop some of those over on my Patreon just so that I can get a little bit of support that way. But I also feel like to ask you to jump over to a Patreon and actually subscribe tells me that you're interested in more. And then the information you're hearing also is going to be graphic. And so I'm not just going to like dump graphicness out there, right? If you're going to choose into that, you're going to choose in. And I feel like there's a level of respect and maturity there that you know what you're stepping into, right?
Right.
So I'm trying to keep that as maybe a layer of protection for people that just really want to hear that it's real, but don't necessarily want to hear the blood and gore, because the blood and gore matters. And this is important for victims too, because there's so much that you're just like, I got to be making this up. Who does this? And it's like, they do this. Just right. So anyway, letterstothepeople.com. You can find me there. You can write to me. If you go onto that site, there's an email address there. If you've got any information or any letters you want to support, if you want to be part of the podcast, reach out to me there. The address is info.letterstothepeople@protonmail.com. You can also find me. I do mentorship. And for some people, I will do some memory recovery. I'm actually creating some programs on inner child work and some things that are going to help people, whether you've got SRA or not. It's really helping you through like life and deep trauma. AsiaRaine.com, and you spell that ASIARAINE.com. That site is currently being built. Right now, if you went there, you would find me as a jeweler, because I'm a silversmith and I make jewelry. Oh, cool. Yeah, it's kind of cool. Actually, it's kind of what happened to me at 2012, like new life started. Right. So you can find me there. And on YouTube, if you look up Asia Raine, I'm dropping a few new things there. So I'm really kind of at the beginning of my vocal, like I'm pushing it out there, but I'm pretty passionate about it. So I'm going to be holding more interviews and workshops. I've been doing those in Utah just to kind of help educate people. And then I'm also I'm on the board of directors of a new nonprofit in Salt Lake that's called Relentless Hope. I think that website is Relentless Hope for You. And that is specifically for SRA victims that are victims from the LDS church. So there's a number of ways that I'm out there right now. So thank you so much, though, Robert. This has been delightful. It has been very, very good. Very satisfying to have this kind of a conversation with you. I just really appreciate you.
Yeah, good. It's been great to have you on. I knew we'd have a great conversation before we hit start. And we'll check back in with you somewhere down the line. And maybe when the nodes go into Aries, we'll check back in with you and see
Okay.
how your path is progressing. Thanks for all your courage and your work, and I'll make sure that everybody has those links
Okay.
where they can get a hold of you in the show notes.
Okay.
So have a wonderful day. Okay.
Thanks. You too. I appreciate that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
you bet. All right.
Bye-bye.
So there we go. Here's Raine. Let it rain. Let it rain. That was a great guest, wasn't she? Awesome. I want to thank Steve, producer Steve, for hooking us up. Good job as always. What else do we have to say or share? Chatari, you're great. I get to watch your comments now through StreamYard, so I get to see what people are saying, and I get to really channel my ADD. It's great. It's great. I get to pay attention, listen, think about what questions I'm going to ask, reference points of what's going on in chat. I love it. I love it. We'll be back here on Sunday night Astro Live, and I've got a number of stuff planned for Sunday night. And one of the things that I'm going to get into on Sunday night, I was advised that I should phrase this in a certain way. I was going to say, what are the worst signs for a certain sign to be in relationship with? But I was advised to rephrase that because perhaps there'd be somebody who might be married to one of those signs, in which case it might be a bit of a downer. So it'll be, what are the signs that are the most challenging to be in relationship with another sign? So I'm going to get into that little pop stuff, little pop astrology, but we'll get into some Pluto and Aquarius. Of course, I'm going to indulge my Sports Jones, and I'm going to take a look at Andrew Wiggins' chart. Andrew Wiggins is in the witness protection program for the Golden State Warriors, and I'm assuming by Sunday night he still will be. And we'll have more stuff going on Sunday night, so join us. Sunday Night Astro Live. And if you liked my little brief dissertation on our chart and you want to book a reading with me, you can do that at robertphoenix.com /services. I'll put a link in the show notes as well. Mods, thank you. Great stuff. Hey, a Sigurd sighting. Huzzah. Huzzah. Great to see Sigurd in here. You guys take care. Use your head in order to discern what's real. Your heart to stay open what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. Have an awesome weekend. See you Sunday night.